My phone vibrated once. The message bloomed on the glass. She's just army trash. An embarrassment. The words looked small on the screen, but the screen was only a mirror. Their image needed mirrors. It always had. 2 name cards, no parents. 2 chairs at the front, shining like teeth in a smile that never reached a face. Late light poured through the chapel's stained glass, a clean blue that cooled my skin. The dregs of floor polish and hymn book paper hung in the air. My heartbeat climbed into my throat, then settled, a soldier's breath drill bringing it down. I slid the phone away and checked the edge of my uniform. The airborne patch rode my shoulder like a verdict. My palms felt dry and tight against the fabric. Somewhere behind me, a boot heel scuffed, the tiny rasp of leather on wood. My people. The 82nd filled the pews in clean lines, medals catching slivers of light. No choreographer, no publicist. Just posture that came from discipline, not optics. The 2 empty chairs kept staring. Where my father's name should have been, blank cardstock. Where my mother's pearls should have clicked against a glass, nothing but air. The air tasted faintly metallic, the way air does before a storm. "Ready?" Leo whispered, his breath steady, coffee and winter mint. He wore a simple suit and eyes that didn't wander to the missing audience. He never auditioned for anyone. He never asked me to, either. I nodded, and the chapel changed focus. The blue of the window softened. The oak of the pews came forward. Rack focus. A camera move without a camera. The organist's first note trembled into place. The sound slid under my ribs and steadied the spin. I walked the aisle. Boots brushed the runner, cloth rasp on cloth. Fingers tapped my sleeve as I passed, tiny, private salutes. One of my privates had oiled the front hinges that morning. The smell of gun oil lingered low, a memory under the lilies. That mix, metal and floral, was my life in a jar. At the front row, I paused. Uncle Daniel stood, older, leaner, a bookshop's dust living in his sweater, and then sat where the family always sat without him. The space remembered his absence. You can feel when a house has tried to erase a person, the way a mirror forgets faces you decide not to bring near it. His hands were warm when he squeezed mine. "Steady on," he murmured. My shoulders dropped a half inch, my jaw unclenched. The vows were simple. No scripts reviewed by staffers, no applause lines. I spoke the words with lips that had tasted desert grit and powdered chalk from airborne towers. When I said, "honor," my tongue brushed a hint of iron, a body's way of remembering blood. When Leo said, "home," my chest opened like a door on good hinges. We kissed. A soft cheer rose and ebbed, boots shifting, palms meeting once, twice, then restraint, the unit's instinct to keep ceremony clean. If my mother had been here, she would have arranged confetti. If my father had been here, he would have arranged cameras. Instead, I had arranged one photo. I turned to the front row and lifted the old digital, nothing fancy, reliability over show. Uncle Daniel stayed where he was, not at the edge, not in the shadows. The lens found 3 faces, mine under a veil thin as tracing paper. Leo at my side, Daniel centered where he had never been allowed. The airborne patch sat in the frame like a thumbprint of light. Click. The shutter cut the room. It was a metronome, and the beat said, "recorded." Truth had a sound, and it wasn't applause. It was that clean, mechanical syllable. I lowered the camera. I could feel the coarse weave of the strap against the inside of my wrist. Somewhere, a child coughed, quickly stifled. Laughter rippled and vanished like breath on glass. Back in the side room, I sent the photo. No filter, no crop, no caption. Just pixels hard enough to scrape at the myth my family tended like a reflecting pool. The progress bar crept, then snapped to done. My phone buzzed again, a small insect trapped under the screen. Blue light slid over my knuckles. I didn't open the response. I didn't need to. Out in the chapel, my platoon formed a loose aisle, sleeves brushing, medals muted. I stepped into their corridor and felt the weight in my legs convert to momentum. Click. Another frame. Hands shaking mine. Daniel's laugh rising soft and rusty. Leo's profile turned to check I was still there. The smell of cake sugar drifted from the back, sweet, layering over oil and lilies. We moved to the doors. The glass panes caught our reflections, stretched them, tried to make us pretty. I caught my own eyes in the ache of that glass and watched them refuse to blur. I walked past the 2 empty chairs without touching them. The wood gleamed like a lie carefully polished. The photo left my hands and cracked their mirror. Before the chapel vows and the photo that cracked their mirror, before Georgetown and the collapse of my father's empire, I have to take you back. Back to the house where I learned that love could be staged, that safety could be edited, and that even silence wore pearls. This is the wound beneath the uniform. I grew up inside a mirror. From the outside, our brick house looked solid. White columns, a lawn shaved to regulation, a flag that never once tangled. Inside, everything shone. Glass tabletops with edges so thin you learned where to put your hands. Framed magazine covers in the hall, glass over glass. A corridor of reflections walking you to breakfast. Even the fruit sat inside a crystal bowl. Faces of apples doubled and tripled until you couldn't tell which red was the real red and which was the room lying back at you. My father liked to watch people watch him. He called it reading the room, but it was really reading the mirrors. He'd stop by the foyer mirror on his way out and square his tie like the last step in a weapons check. My mother would fasten her pearls 2 inches lower than any neckline because tasteful was a value, not just a style. When I was small, I loved the click of that clasp. It sounded like something closing safely. Later, I learned it was the sound of a lock. Campaign season was perpetual. Rallies, breakfasts, town halls, debates that were really telethons with better lighting. The house had a drawer full of lapel pins and a closet full of folding signs that smelled like ink and dust. Staffers walked through the kitchen at all hours, pressing phones to their faces. Their voices turned polite and rubbery. Details mattered. How high the bun, how short the hem, whether a laugh read gracious or shrill. My mother kept a binder labeled optics, plastic sleeves fogged with fingerprints. The binder lived on the counter like a family cookbook. "Shoulders back," my father would say every time a camera appeared, which was always. He'd tap the center of my back with 2 fingers, not hard enough to bruise, just hard enough to own my posture. I learned to smile with my teeth mostly hidden. I learned to find the nearest lens and square myself to it like an altar. Click. The press line outside our house on a good morning sounded like rain on a tin roof. They'd call my father's name as if that were the spell. Sometimes they said mine. "Rachel, over here!" A man's hand would lift as if to wave, but it was only his camera finding me. I could feel them arranging me with light. The first public humiliation that stung in a way my body never forgot came under fluorescent gym lights. I was 12, hair pulled back, regulation poster board propped on a borrowed easel. My experiment was basic. The capillary action of celery stalks dyed with food coloring. But I had stayed up 2 nights measuring water loss, charting shifts on graph paper I ruled by hand. The gym smelled like rubber and custodial cleaner and sugar from a bake sale that elbowed into the fair. Judges moved like storm fronts, slow, inevitable, full of static charge. When it was my turn at the microphone, my throat tightened. I swallowed. The swallow was loud in my head. I talked about xylem like a girl who had not yet learned which words were cute and which words marked you as trying. My father stood with a cluster of donors by the bleachers, flanked by a television crew who had decided this would be warm filler for the end of the evening news. My mother's pearls were perfect. I could see her from across the gym lengthen her mouth into what she called encouragement. A judge nodded. He pinned a ribbon on my board, blue, fluttering, an exacting little piece of cloth. The television light found us. The reporter crouched because I was still a head shorter than the logo on his microphone. "How proud are you, Senator?" he asked, voice tilted with the performer's smile. My father laughed. "It's adorable," he said. Then, facing the lens full on, "She's got a blue ribbon already. Maybe she'll work her way up to a Senate seat someday." It landed like a pat on the head you can't duck. The crowd laughed. Not cruel, just automatic. The way people laugh when a line is offered to them and they know their job is to receive it. My cheeks burned. My palms went damp. I could feel the ribbon's edge scratch the side of my hand, and I held very still because movement would have been a plea. Click. Somewhere, a camera caught my face, deciding not to fall apart. My mother told me afterward that the word adorable had pulled very well with suburban women. "It's a warm word," she said, ushering me into the car. The leather smelled like a store. She turned the mirror down and blotted my forehead with a napkin meant for spills. "You looked shiny." "I worked hard," I said. The words scraped my mouth like sand. "Of course you did," she said. Pearls, tidy in their little curve, flashed in the rear view. "Now, chin up." The house had rules. We pretended it didn't, because rules sound cold and the house had to be warm. But we knew them. Laugh, but do not snort. Answer, but do not correct. Be proud, but not of anything that cannot be photographed. Image over love. Those weren't the words on the wall, but they might as well have been stitched on the throw pillows. At 13, I started to notice photos changing. Not fading, changing. The mantel had a gallery arranged like a family tree. One Thursday after school, the frames were cleaned, glass wiped to a humming, chemical shine. The photo of my father and his younger brother Daniel was gone. Not moved, gone. The space it left had been filled by a shot from a committee dinner. My father's arm around a man I had never seen inside our house, both wearing the look of men who had just counted something. "Where's the one with Uncle Daniel?" I asked. "In the album," my mother said, without turning around. She was busy arranging flowers whose stems she cut at a diagonal because that read more gracious. "We're updating the collection." I went to the hall closet for the album. The album smelled like glue and old paper, and the dust that lives in fabric spines. The plastic sleeves lifted with a wet whisper. No Daniel there either. A space where the photo had been left blank, and a page had been glued down over it so I couldn't even see the edge. "Why?" I asked at dinner. Plates tapped gently against placemats with little anchors stitched into the hems. My father spun his wine by the stem. "Daniel chose to step away," he said. "It's better for everyone if we respect his choice." His choice? I said. The fork was heavy in my hand. The tines left little crescents in the butter. He didn't want to be associated, my mother said, smile steady, eyes flat. And we have to move forward. Later, I learned the choice was this: speak up about a campaign slush fund that wasn't supposed to exist, or let it exist and take a photo with your brother on election night. Daniel spoke. He called a journalist. The story didn't stick because our people were good at their jobs, and unreliable brother was a simpler plot than impropriety. The result was still sticky, a cold smear over the parts of him that used to be ours. The next week, a staffer boxed the last of Daniel's books from the guest room, and my mother changed the subject by adding a bowl of lemons to the dining room, like a son you could eat. The lemons reflected in the glass. The bowl of brightness said, "Don't look here." Click. Cameras in the driveway caught my father leaving to focus on the work. The first time I saw Daniel after that was by accident. I was 16 and had run from a fundraiser after someone said my dress read expensive instead of read tasteful. I walked until my feet hurt in the new heels. Then I took them off and carried them, like a woman in a painting might carry her shoes, if paintings allowed women that kind of exit. I found a bookstore tucked between a dry cleaner and a consignment shop. The sign was crooked in a way I recognized as honesty. The bell above the door made a sound that wasn't on camera pretty. The air smelled like dust, old glue, the paper tang that settles into your throat. A man was shelving paperbacks in the back, slow, careful. He was thinner than the last time I had seen him, his hair streaked with the gray they always tried to take out of photos. He turned and saw me and stood very still, as if any motion might send me away. "Rachel," he said. My name did what names do when they're said by someone who hasn't tried to sell them. "Uncle Daniel," I said. The word uncle felt contraband on my tongue. We didn't hug at first. There is a choreography to reunions that bad families teach you without a syllabus. He gestured to a chair by a window thin with drafts, and we sat. The chair springs squeaked in a way our house would never forgive. He poured tea from a scratched kettle. The cup was chipped. The chip looked like a continent. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't ask if I was allowed. He asked if I wanted honey. We talked around the facts for a while. I watched how his hands wrapped the cup like a person choosing warmth on purpose. When he finally asked about home, he said, "How is the house?" "Clean," I said. "And you?" He raised an eyebrow in a family way I recognized in the mirror and nowhere else. "Clean," I said again. And then the word fell apart. I started to talk, not the way staffers talk, parceling detail into use, but the way a body talks when it finds a room that doesn't take notes. I told him about the binder, about the mirror in the foyer with its magnifying lights, about the way my mother's pearls sounded when they knocked a glass at a fundraiser, and how I had realized that wasn't a pretty sound, it was a clink of agreement. Daniel listened like a person who had chosen listening as a job. He put my phone face down on the table without touching it. The gesture felt like an offering to a quiet God. He showed me the back room. There was a couch with a throw that didn't match anything, because nothing here was trying to match. He pulled a small lockbox from under the couch, a thing with a coded dial. The kind you buy when you don't trust a sturdier world to keep your small things safe. "This can be yours," he said, "if you ever need a place to put things no one else can find." "What things?" "The kind that make you feel like you exist," he said. His smile wasn't tragic or noble. It was tired and real. Safety is love you can measure. Well, that sentence sat down in my chest. It found floor. I started leaving tokens there. A photo strip from a booth Leo and I ducked into the first time we held hands without worrying about who was watching. A copy of a letter I'd written myself at 13. All the ways I wanted to love that did not include donors. A patch from training I was told not to wear to any event with donors because it sent the wrong message. The lock turned and the sound was clean like the clap of my mother's clasp, but it meant the opposite. It meant the thing stayed mine. When I told my father I had enlisted, he didn't look up from the TV. The television reflected his face back so smoothly you might think it was listening. He watched a shot of himself on a Sunday show, answering a question with a chuckle that someone had written to seem spontaneous. "I'm joining the army," I said again, because sometimes you have to repeat truth to wake a room. He clicked the remote, volume down. Not off. "Take a breath," he said. "We can find you something more fitting to your potential." "You taught me service mattered," I said. My hands were cold, though the room was warm. I curled my toes inside my shoes to find the edges of myself. "This is service." "Blue-collar cosplay," he said, the words landing like a paper cut you don't feel until you see the blood. "Don't embarrass yourself." My mother, at the doorway, blinked twice. The pearls glinted. "It's a phase," she said, and made a note on her mental calendar to schedule a lunch with a friend who once worked at an NGO that put celebrities on pamphlets. At my first airborne tower climb, the chalk dust got everywhere: hair, lashes, the corners of your teeth. I remember gripping the rope and thinking of my father's tie, and picking up the rope anyway. Remembered my mother's pearls, and saw instead the open sky at 34 feet, the air tasting like the inside of a freezer and metal. The ground spun and settled, and that settling felt like truth finally winning around. When I came home from my first deployment, my boots carried dust from a country my father visited once for a photo, by a tent he never slept in. I texted my mother from the parking lot. She sent a heart and said there was a scheduling conflict and could I swing by between 10 and 10:30 because they had a donor brunch at 11. The brunch was at our house. The same house whose door I hadn't had a key to since I was 12, because keys ruin lines in dresses. I stood on the front steps at 10:07 a.m. The doorbell's tone had been chosen by a consultant. It was warm, non-threatening, calibrated to a demographic. A staffer opened the door and smiled without seeing me. I smelled fresh coffee, lemon polish, and the rising idea of eggs. "Can I help you?" she said. "I live here," I said, and the words sounded wrong even though they were true. "Oh," she said, and took in the uniform and the boots and the hair that hadn't been coaxed into a television wave. "Of course, Rachel." She blinked, then remembered. "Your parents are just getting ready." In the kitchen, my mother hugged me with her arms and not with her body. The pearls clicked. "We are so proud," she said. "We have 10 minutes. My father came in on his phone, laughing at something. He hung up and kissed my cheek with no lip. "Make yourself presentable," he said, and gestured at the stairs. "You can come down after we've said hello to the donors." "They love seeing the family." "Do they want to see me?" I asked. My voice was steady. The steadiness felt like a thing I had to hold with 2 hands. "They want to see what we stand for," he said. His eyes slid past me to the glass door where a photographer was waiting to catch a candid that had been placed on a schedule. I went to the upstairs bathroom and closed the door and sat on the floor. The tile was too cold for the season because the temperature of our house was not set by weather but by image. I listened to the first guests arrive. Laughter floated, the way laughter does when people believe themselves to be generous. I stared at myself in the mirror and saw a person the house had not planned. Click. I took a photo on my phone, not of me, but of the closed bathroom door and my boots in the frame, and sent it to Daniel. He wrote back, "Couch is open." I left the brunch without saying goodbye. Outside, the air was honest. The sun didn't care what I looked like when I stood in it. There were other small things, too many to hold up one by one. My cousin's graduation party, where my mother coached me away from mentioning an award that didn't come with a plaque because stories need objects. The way a staffer corrected my laugh at a gala by resting a hand on my arm. The light touch that means heavy instruction. The time my father referred to a Gold Star mother as good optics when he thought his mic was off. And then he smoothed his suit jacket and went on stage and spoke about sacrifice, with a face that understood how to be moved on command. By the time Leo came into my life, I had the two halves of myself sorted into separate rooms. One wore neutral dresses and learned how to pass hors d'oeuvres back to waiters with a smile that made the handoff invisible. The other wore canvas and kept her hair tight and counted breaths for a living. We met in a corridor of a conference my father thought I should attend, the kind of defense industry event he loved because it let him stand near language he didn't speak but could sell. Leo stood with his back to the glass wall, not looking into his reflection but past it to the city. He had hands that looked like they built things, and eyes that did not practice their expression. When we talked, he asked me what I actually did, not what I represented. He didn't ask for a photo. At home, when my father asked about Leo, he said, "Engineer?" The way some people say barista when they mean temporary. "Something like that," I said. Leo had asked me not to name the company he was building until it mattered. I understood secrecy as safety. "He's good." "Good at what?" my father said, and the what there meant good at being seen. "Good at making things that work," I said. The answer didn't fit in his mouth. He put it down like a utensil that clinked the wrong note against the plate. My mother met Leo once, on a porch where she served tea as if tea were a costume. She watched him with the gaze she used for possible donors' wives, soft, inventorying, polite to the point of erasure. "What a nice, quiet young man," she said afterward, as if quiet were a flaw you could buff to a shine. "He didn't look at himself in any window," I said. "That's rare here." She smiled as if I were paying a compliment. I wasn't. There were fights I could describe frame by frame, but what matters is the accumulation. Shame is accumulative. You carry it in your shoulders, which hunch when you hear a camera bag unzip, and in your jaw, which clenches when someone says, "Be yourself," and means, "Be the self we rehearsed." You feel it in your stomach when you enter a room with glass walls, and all the walls show you back to yourself in angles you didn't choose. You taste it like penny iron when someone you love says the thing that fits the message and not the moment. The last fight before the chapel wasn't even a fight. It was a script reading. My father called to say there would be a larger venue available if we moved the ceremony to one of the big churches in town. It would send a unifying message, he said. Veterans, faith, family, the trifecta. "We're keeping it small," I said. "Fayetteville, the chapel with the sticky pews." He sighed. The sigh he used when a staffer forgot a talking point. "You can have your church," he said, "but don't bring complications." "What complications?" He hesitated, then didn't. "Daniel." That's not your choice, I said, and I felt the old heat rise under my skin, the kind that used to make my hands sweat and my words go soft. They didn't go soft. He's my family. Family is what we protect, he said, and sometimes that means editing what is harmful. You don't get to edit my life, I said. The sentence tasted right. It set like something cooling into the shape it was always supposed to be. After the call, I went to Daniel's bookstore. The bell spoke the same honest note. He made the same tea. I told him I wanted him in the front row. He looked at his hands as if checking whether they were clean enough to touch that idea. I haven't sat there in a long time, he said. It's where you belong, I said. In the picture. He laughed, a short, rusted sound that warmed as it went. Careful, Rachel. Pictures in your world are weapons. I know, I said. That's why I'm taking one. He pulled the lockbox from under the couch and set it on the table. Then put this inside it, he said, and slid a folded letter across to me. The paper had been handled a lot. The fold lines were soft. It's something I wrote when I left. I didn't know if I'd ever use it. Maybe it's time. In my hands, the letter felt heavier than paper. It felt like a tool. At night, before the wedding, I lay awake and listened to the refrigerator hum. The house where Leo and I chose to live did not have a binder on the counter. The walls were plain. The mirrors showed exactly what they had to and no more. When fear came, because it came, I counted breaths like I had learned. In for 4, hold for 4, out for 6. My shoulders dropped. My jaw loosened. The space behind my ribs made room for my heart to move without pinning itself to bone. I dreamed of glass. In my dream, the foyer mirror at my parents' house had a crack at the edge so fine you could mistake it for a hair. I put my finger on it and felt it widen with a soft, dry sound. Click. A memory, not a camera. The body remembers by sound. The morning of the chapel, I packed the digital camera I trusted more than my phone. I didn't need features. I needed proof that wasn't an app. I printed 2 name cards for the front row and left the blanks blank. I put the science fair ribbon in my pocket, not to wear, but to remember the way cloth can be used to tell a story you didn't get to write. I touched the airborne patch, felt the little heat the embroidery holds when you run your fingers over it. I fastened nothing around my neck. On the way out, I opened the lockbox in Daniel's back room and slid the letter inside. I put the camera's second memory card there too, sealed inside a small plastic case as if water or time might find it otherwise. I spun the dial to code and felt the lock take the number the way your palms take warmth, without fanfare, only function. This is what the wound looked like, in the end. Not one large cut, but 100 polished surfaces in which I couldn't see myself unless someone else wanted me to. The wound spoke in instructions, in the light tap of 2 fingers between my shoulder blades, in pearls clicking like a metronome at a meeting, in the little laugh at a microphone when a grown man made a child's work into a prop. It spoke in a missing photo and an album glued shut. It spoke in a doorbell chosen for its appeal to a segment. And it healed, slowly, along the grain of a different sound, the clean cut of a shutter in a room not designed for performance, the measured pour of tea into a chipped cup, the click of a lock that meant yours. The wound didn't disappear. It taught me where to stand. Before the dinner invitations and the study confrontation, there was a choice. I had to decide whose eyes I wanted on me when I said the word forever. Not cameras, not donors. Just the people who had carried weight beside me in the mud. This was the turn. The moment I chose a family that wasn't edited. The Fayetteville Chapel was a box of wood and light, not marble and chandeliers. Dust hovered in the shafts of sun as if the air itself was holding its breath. The floor carried a sheen from wax laid down by hands that knew no broadcast would ever show it. Every bench had been worn smooth by years of service, by knees bending in prayer, by uniforms scratching against the grain. It was not the cathedral my parents would have chosen. It was mine. I had mailed the invitations myself, ink pressed by hand, no calligraphy, no embossed seal. My handwriting looped, clumsy but real, across the envelopes. And they came. The only family that mattered. The 82nd Airborne filled the chapel with presence. Their rows looked like parade lines, but this was no performance. Sergeant Alvarez, his left leg a prosthetic polished brighter than his shoes, sat upright in his dress uniform. He grinned when he saw me enter, tapping his crutch once against the pew, a quiet percussion of solidarity. Next to him, Carter, the medic who once pulled shrapnel from my arm with hands steady as stone, adjusted his tie like it was strangling him. He had always been braver with blood than with fabric. Behind them, Martinez, eyes sharp, hair clipped short, the one who always made us laugh even under blackout tents, mouthed a word I couldn't hear but knew. Finally. The chapel smelled faintly of starch, of metals polished with brasso, of cigarette smoke clinging to wool. These were my people. Every one of them had faced dirt, noise, fire, and still chosen to stand. Leo was waiting at the altar, and when I looked at him, the air steadied. His suit was too plain for magazines, his shoes scuffed at the edges, his eyes unpolished. He didn't need to perform. He had always been private, not shy, but purposeful in silence. He carried the kind of quiet that builds things in secret and lets the work speak later. I had once stumbled into his lab, an old warehouse where the air hummed with machines. Rows of drones lined the benches, their frames skeletal, their circuits twitching like nerves. One hovered in place, sensors whispering to each other in coded pulses. A counter UAV system, designed to hear enemy eyes in the sky and silence them. The space smelled of solder and melted plastic, the soundtrack a chorus of whirring fans and the crisp tap of keys. I had stood in the doorway, watching him adjust the settings, his brow furrowed, his lips moving in half-formed calculations. He looked up only when he sensed me, and the recognition in his eyes wasn't pride or defensiveness. It was trust. He wanted me to see what he was building, not to display it, but because he knew I would hold the secret. That trust was with me now, folded into my chest like another vow. And then there was Daniel. Uncle Daniel walked into the chapel slowly, a figure the family had once erased with deliberate hands. His suit was outdated, jacket softened at the elbows, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity that didn't need pressing. Dust seemed to cling to him the way it clings to bookshelves in old stores, the scent of ink, old paper, and honesty. The soldiers shifted when he entered, at first cautious, unsure if he belonged. Then Alvarez nodded, Carter offered a seat, and slowly Daniel was absorbed into the geometry of the pews. Family recognizes family, even if politics pretends not to. Before the ceremony, in the cramped preparation room that smelled of starch and flowers, he handed me a folded letter. His hands trembled slightly, whether from age or the weight of the moment, I couldn't tell. The folds had gone soft with time, the paper thin at the edges. "I wrote this when I left," he said. His voice rasped with the years bookstores had stolen from him. "Didn't know if I'd ever give it to you. Maybe now I didn't open it then." I tucked it into my palm, felt its weight. "You're in the front row today. I told him, not in the shadows. He looked down, almost smiled. Rachel, pictures in this family are weapons. That's why I'm taking one, I said. The vows were brief. Leo's hand was steady in mine, warm, solid. My words tasted like chalk dust from the airborne tower, the grit of training days, the metallic tang of sand. When I said honor, the word rattled in my chest like a loose, round chambering. When he said home, my shoulders dropped a fraction, as if the pack had slid away. We kissed. A cheer rose, boots shuffled, medals clinked once or twice, then silence. Soldiers knew restraint. My parents would have arranged confetti. They would have arranged cameras. Instead, I arranged one photograph. I lifted the camera. Daniel didn't flinch, didn't lean aside, didn't pretend to excuse himself. He sat there, present, undeniable. The lens found the three of us, me, veil light as tracing paper, Leo, suit unpolished, Daniel, hands folded in the lap history tried to erase. The airborne patch glowed at my shoulder like a beacon. Click. The sound sliced the air. It wasn't just memory. It was evidence. Later, in the side room, I pressed send. No filter, no caption, just the photo. Their reply came fast. My phone buzzed against the wood, an angry insect under glass. Richard's comms chief first. Rachel, delete this immediately. You don't understand the implications. Delete it. As if it were a typo. As if Daniel's presence were a mistake to edit out. I ignored it. Another message, a donor. This could complicate endorsements. The senator's enemies will seize it. I laughed, the sound sharp enough to cut my own throat. You don't get to edit my life, I said aloud, to the mirror above the sink. My reflection stared back, stripped of posture drills and polite angles. Just me. That night, the ripples spread. A former staffer, one who had once whispered warnings to me when I was a teenager, wrote, "They'll come harder now. Protect yourself." A reporter I half remembered from a press line sent an email. Confirm your uncle is in the photo? Sources buzzing. The ground shifted under their empire, and all it had taken was a single frame. Not long after, my phone buzzed again. This time, a name I hadn't seen in years. Marcy, once my father's aide, once the woman who passed me protein bars during campaign marathons when everyone else forgot I was still a child. Her message was longer than the others. Rachel, I saw the photo. I remember when they boxed up Daniel's things. I remember the order to cut him out of everything. You've cracked something they can't glue back. Be careful. They'll spin harder now. My chest tightened, not with fear, but with a strange heat. Someone who had worked inside their machine was admitting the lie out loud. Then the phone rang. Unknown number, DC code, I answered. Rachel Ward? The voice was thin, hurried. A journalist I half remembered from a town hall years ago, the kind who always stood one row behind the networks. I just need confirmation. Was that Daniel Ward in the photo? Your father's brother? The chapel laughter was still echoing outside. Guitars strumming, boots tapping. My throat felt dry. Yes, I said. One word. It felt like cutting glass. The journalist inhaled sharply, scribbling already. This changes things. Thank you. He hung up without goodbye. The air in the side room felt different after that. The mirror over the sink didn't just show me. It showed a story now larger than me, already carried away in wires and signals. Outside, the reception unfolded under string lights someone had borrowed from a base supply closet. Alvarez tapped his prosthetic in rhythm as Martinez strummed a battered guitar. Carter laughed so hard his tie came loose. Plates of barbecue replaced champagne flutes. A sheet cake leaned slightly to one side, frosting imperfect, delicious. Daniel stood in the corner, a plastic cup of sweet tea in hand. He looked out at the soldiers, at Leo, at me. For the first time in decades, no one told him to move out of the shot. The chapel photo was already spreading through private phones, screens glowing in the dark. It would soon cross into newsrooms, into inboxes, into the bloodstream of the machine my father had built. A machine that ran on mirrors, suddenly forced to swallow an image it couldn't polish. Then came the envelope, heavy cardstock, my name engraved. Inside, a dinner invitation at the Georgetown mansion. A chance to reconcile. I knew the cadence. Reconcile meant bend. Reconcile meant bury. Reconcile meant surrender. I folded the paper twice, then twice again, until it was a small, hard square. I placed it on the table between Leo and me. He didn't need to read it. His eyes told me he already knew. "This is a trap," I said. "Then we walk in knowing it's a trap," he said. His hand covered mine, calloused from building, not shaking hands. "And we don't give them the performance they expect." Outside, another burst of laughter rose from the soldiers. Someone opened a beer with the edge of a knife. The sound was sharp, honest, unrefined. It was family. The envelope came later, heavy and embossed. Georgetown, reconciliation. But reconciliation was just another word for obedience. I folded it until it was a tight square, sharp edges pressing into my palm. I laid it between Leo and me. He didn't need to ask. "We'll go," he said, "but we'll go on our terms." For the first time, I felt the balance shift inside me, not just resisting their edits, but choosing to write the page myself. A soldier's steadiness, but also a daughter's defiance. Outside, my comrades shouted another toast. Someone's prosthetic tapped the floor like a drumbeat. Daniel smiled from his corner, watching as if time had finally folded the right way. And in the quiet between sounds, I knew it. I was no longer bracing against their storm. I was moving toward it. The Georgetown mansion was waiting, and I was ready to meet it head on. I have to tell you how I prepared, because you don't walk into a trap without mapping the exits. You don't confront a man who edits lives without stockpiling the proof he tried to erase. The plan wasn't spectacle. It was survival. It was dignity sharpened to a blade. I started by laying everything out on the table in Daniel's back room. The bookstore was quiet, the only sound the kettle cooling on the counter. Papers spread across the wood like battle plans. Emails, memos, texts, Daniel's folded letter. The edges curled slightly, years of hiding pressing themselves into the fibers. My hands weren't steady at first. When I tried to smooth the copies, my fingers trembled. Not from weakness, but from the pressure of knowing what they meant. I pressed my palms flat until the paper warmed under my skin. "This is real," I whispered, though no one was there to hear. My pulse slowed. The uniform hung nearby, freshly pressed. Olive fabric, airborne patch at the shoulder. When I lifted it, The weight surprised me. Heavier than it had been on training days. Heavier than it had felt in the desert. I realized the fabric wasn't just cloth now. It carried meaning. It carried defiance. I slipped one sleeve over my arm, then the other. The scent of starch and faint gun oil clung to the weave. My throat tightened. For a second, I remembered the science fair ribbon, soft blue, brushed off as adorable, and that ribbon had been a dismissal. This patch was a declaration. I fastened each button as if it were a vow. Leo leaned in the doorway, watching without speaking. His silence wasn't absence. It was presence at its most respectful. When I caught his eye, he nodded once. That was enough. We talked about the dinner. It won't just be reconciliation, I said. My voice stayed level, though the nerves pressed at my chest. It'll be a test. Maybe an attempt to buy me back. Or to humiliate me in front of donors. Or worse, go after you. Leo crossed the room, setting down a folder on the table. They've already sniffed around LM Technologies, he said. A few lobbyists tried to set meetings I didn't take. Your father's circle wants leverage. They'll use the dinner to push it. They think if they make me small, they make you smaller. The words settled like sandbags, heavy but firm. It gave the trap a shape. Not just a family confrontation, but a hostile takeover dressed as a dinner toast. I rehearsed in my head, not lines, not speeches, but how I'd hold myself. My father always said presence mattered more than words. I'd use his rule against him. Shoulders even, eyes calm, no tremor in the jaw. I practiced breathing until my chest rose and fell without strain. Daniel came in as I tightened the last button. He carried tea, the steam curling like ghost handwriting above the cup. He set it beside me, then looked at the table of evidence. His eyes softened, but his mouth stayed firm. You've done what he never expected, he said. What's that? Prepared. I almost laughed, but the weight in my stomach wouldn't let it out. Before leaving, I packed everything into a plain leather folder. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed spectacle. The proof wasn't theater. It was truth, and truth could be carried quietly. When I closed the folder, I felt my hands steady. The fear was still there, humming in the edges of my body. Damp palms, quickened pulse. But now it was useful. Fear became alertness. Fear sharpened the lines of the plan. We drove toward D.C. as twilight thinned across the sky. Government buildings loomed, glass facades catching our reflection and multiplying it into 100 distorted versions. I stared at them, remembering all the years I had been forced to stand straight in their glow. This time, I didn't look away. The Georgetown mansion rose ahead, its windows glowing like watchful eyes. I could almost hear the pearls clicking, glasses clinking, donors rehearsing polite laughter. I knew how it would go. Charm first, pressure second, humiliation third. They'd dangle promises of acceptance if I bent. They'd try to make Leo invisible, then disposable. And if none of that worked, they'd aim to break me in front of everyone. But I wasn't walking blind. The folder pressed firm under my arm. The airborne patch rested on my shoulder. And for the first time, I felt ready. Not just to endure the storm, but to turn and face it head on. I need to place you inside the Georgetown mansion. Imagine chandeliers that gleam like interrogations, donors dressed as allies, and a table polished so bright it reflects your own face back at you until you want to look away. That was the battlefield, and my father, Senator Richard Ward, had been sharpening his knives for years. The mansion doors opened with a groan. Brass handles, polished wood, air scented with cigars and roses clipped into exact submission. The staffer who took my coat hesitated when she saw the airborne patch on my shoulder. Just half a heartbeat, but enough. Symbols speak faster than mouths. The dining hall stretched, long, polished mahogany like a runway. Donors in tuxedos and gowns filled the seats, their laughter brittle. The chandeliers dripped light like interrogations. At the head of the table, Richard stood, raising his glass. "Rachel," he said, voice amplified by the hush. "Welcome home." Home. The word tasted like rust. I walked the length of the table, each step echoing too loud, my chest tight. My pulse hammered, palms damp, nails pressing into my folder until the leather left ridges in my skin. I forced each breath slow, steady, the way I had under fire. Leo walked beside me, a calm anchor. Daniel behind us, not erased, not hidden. The first toast rang false. "To family," and the word clattered like a dropped fork. Dinner unfolded. Porcelain clinked, knives whispered against meat. My father played the charming host, weaving smiles like smoke. But I knew how he worked. First soften, then strike. It came mid-course. Richard rose, glass in hand. "We've all seen the photo," he said, savoring the words. Faces turned toward me. Unexpected. Embarrassing. But youth makes mistakes. The word embarrassing buzzed in my skull. My jaw clenched. Breath caught sharp. Under the table, Leo's hand brushed mine once. A silent order. Hold steady. My father set his glass down. "But let's move to real business. Progress, security, the future. Your husband, an engineer, yes? Clever enough. Perhaps too clever. A company, LM Technologies. Fragile, promising. I have contractors ready to fold it into something greater. A buyout, generous, of course. Family takes care of family." The trap. Humiliation dressed as inheritance. Reduce Leo to a pawn. Absorb his work. Erase me as a footnote. I pushed back my chair. Wood scraped marble. The sound cut the room. My heart slammed against my ribs so hard I feared the tremor would show in my hands. I pressed my palms flat to the table to steady them. "You want to talk about family?" My voice carried. "Then let's talk about what family has meant in this house." I pulled the folder free. Papers spread across the polished table, black ink shouting from white pages. Erase Daniel, belittle Rachel, image over truth. Donors leaned forward, pearls and cufflinks catching the light as their eyes devoured the words. My father's mask slipped, just a flicker. "Fabrications," he said. "Context taken wrong." "Context?" I snapped. My breath quickened, hot in my throat. I forced my shoulders square, my voice sharp. "Context is my science fair ribbon dismissed as adorable. Context is my service called blue-collar cosplay. Context Is Daniel erased from our lives because he told the truth? Daniel stepped forward, voice calm as stone. I was cut out because I refused to lie. That's the only context. Murmurs rolled like thunder under marble. Leo rose beside me. He drew documents from his jacket, board filings, legal seals. He laid them atop mine. His voice was low, steady. My name is Leo Miller, founder of LM Technologies. We don't need folding. We don't need saving. We don't need your contractors. Gasps. A glass slipped, shattering. My father's smile faltered. Leo's eyes cut across the table. Our systems shoot down false eyes in the sky. Drones that lie. Drones that spy. Maybe tonight they'll do the same for false empires. The line landed. Silence. Donors blinked, calculating. I reached again into the folder, fingers damp, knuckles stiff from gripping so hard. The frame came out. I set the chapel photo upright on the polished table. My hand trembled, but I forced it still until the glass clicked against wood. This, I said, breath sharp, heart rattling like a drum, is the first honest family photo we've ever taken. And you can't erase it. The room froze. My father's mouth opened, jaw working, rage straining through his teeth. Rachel. No. I leaned in, pressing my hands flat, pain shooting through my palms as wood bit flesh. I won't be edited. Not by you, not by anyone. I choose dignity. I choose truth. At the far end of the table, his comms chief stirred. A small recorder appeared in his hand, raised like a weapon. She's unstable, he started. We've got proof. Old footage, off script, enough to... But he didn't finish. A donor's aide had his own phone out, already recording. Another guest muttered, "This is all on tape." Suddenly, the trap backfired. Their attempt to smear me only captured Richard's fury, his denial, his empire cracking live in front of witnesses. And then my mother moved. Her pearls trembled at her throat. For years, her smile had been perfect porcelain. Tonight, it cracked. Her lips parted, eyes glossed, not with practiced tears, but with something unguarded. Shame. Maybe grief. Maybe the weight of decades collapsing. "Richard," she whispered. Just his name, not defense, not loyalty, a plea. The donors reacted in kind. One red-faced man shoved his chair back, voice sharp. "I won't be part of this circus!" He stormed out, footsteps hammering marble. A woman in sapphire clutched her glass, knuckles white, whispering to her aide, who tapped frantically on his phone. Others whispered furiously, eyes darting, doing the math. Was the senator now worth the cost? Some rose quietly, folding napkins, slipping toward the doors without a glance back. The empire was bleeding out across crystal and marble. My chest ached with the weight of my breath, heart still slamming. Sweat slid down the back of my neck. Every nerve screamed to step away, to collapse. Instead, I pressed harder into the table, forcing stillness into my limbs. I wasn't 12 with a ribbon in my hand, watching cameras laugh. I wasn't the soldier locked out of brunch. I was here, in the center of his empire, steady while it fell. And I did not flinch. I need to show you what comes after collapse. Because the noise of a chandelier falling is loud, but the silence that follows is louder. After Georgetown, after the photo shattered the room, there was fallout. There was rebuilding. There was a new picture, one they could never crop. The headlines came first. By morning, my father's name wasn't a title, it was a scandal. Senator Ward accused of erasing brother-daughter's service. Family photo goes viral, a senator's hidden history. The chapel image had bled across networks, carried in articles, reposted until its pixels seemed to hum with a life of their own. Staffers defected. Aides who had once smiled and swallowed now leaked memos. The memos matched mine. The silence had been broken, and once a silence breaks, it doesn't heal. Within a week, Richard Ward resigned. His statement on the Senate floor tried to blame personal misunderstandings, but the words rang hollow. His hands trembled on the lectern. His eyes darted not to the cameras, but to the gallery, where faces no longer softened at his smile. My mother didn't stand beside him. She was gone before the speech. Quiet, efficient, the way she had lived. One pearl necklace left behind in a drawer. A clasp undone. A soundless admission. Days later, she sent me a letter with 6 words only. I was wrong. I am sorry. No signature. I held the note in my hand, unsure whether to believe it, but the absence of defense mattered more than the apology. The house in North Carolina felt different without their shadow. For the first time, I opened the curtains wide and let the sun decide the light. Leo and I planted rosemary in the backyard, the soil dark under our nails. The porch became a place for coffee at dawn, not photo ops. Daniel moved closer, his bookstore transplanted 2 towns over. The air smelled of paper and dust, the way safety does when it has had time to settle. One night, Daniel stood with me on the porch, our son Sam asleep inside, his small breaths steady. The night hummed with cicadas, warm air clinging to our skin. Daniel set a cup of tea on the railing and said, "You've turned betrayal into something that breathes." He was talking about the scholarship. We named it the Daniel Vance Scholarship, using his full name, unedited, restored. It funded the children of soldiers who had been humiliated by families obsessed with image. Kids told their service wasn't pretty enough for cameras. The first recipient was a girl with a laugh too loud for photographs. I watched her clutch the letter of award, fingers shaking, and I thought, safety is love you can measure. The chapel photo hung above our bookshelf, framed in wood, Daniel's face unblurred, Leo's eyes steady, my uniform patch sharp as ever. Next to it, a newer photo. Leo and I at a backyard table, Daniel at our side, and Sam on my lap, a tiny airborne patch stitched onto his onesie. Behind him, on a shelf, my mother's pearls sat inside a shadowed drawer, hidden but not forgotten. I sometimes touched the ribbon from the science fair. Its cloth was still soft, its edges still intact. For years, it had been a symbol of dismissal, of how image had crushed effort. Now it lay in a box beside Sam's toys, not to be erased, but to remind me, truth can outlast ridicule. The world didn't stop being sharp. My father still lived somewhere, angry, unrepentant, his empire gone, but his pride intact. My mother lived quieter, a shadow of a woman who had once smiled too perfectly. But their absence didn't define me anymore. What defined me was the porch light on warm nights, the laughter of friends who were family, the sight of Sam reaching for Daniel's glasses, Leo teaching him to balance blocks like drones on a table. What defined me was a scholarship check handed to a teenager whose eyes lit up brighter than any chandelier. The empire of mirrors had fallen. What stood was wood, earth, dust, and love measured in safety. True family is not built on image. It is built on love, safety, and honesty. If you've ever fought to build a family of your own choosing, if you've ever refused to let image erase truth, subscribe for more stories of courage and reckoning. Because every secret has its breaking point, and every mirror can shatter.